Care of the sick must rank before and above everything, so that they may truly be served as Christ himself. For he said, I was sick and you visited me, and whatever you did for one of these who are least, you did for me. But let the sick themselves consider that they are served out of honor for God, and they are not to sadden their brothers, who serve them with superfluous demands. Yet they are to be patiently borne, because from such as these a more abundant reward is acquired. The abbot shall therefore exercise the greatest care that they not suffer any neglect. These brothers who are sick are to be assigned a separate room and a God-fearing attendant who is also diligent and solicitous. Baths may be offered the sick whenever this is helpful, but those who are healthy, especially the young, are to be allowed this less frequently. Additionally, the sick who are very weak may be allowed to eat meat to recover their strength, but when they are better, all are to abstain from meat as usual. Moreover, the abbot is to maintain the greatest care that the sick are not neglected by the cellars or attendants, for he is responsible for whatever is lacking in his disciples.
The rule continues to be very incarnational, and as I said the other day, it is an interpretation of the gospel. And here we have care of the elderly, care of physical needs, and Benedict is very strong on care of the young and care of the elderly, and he's also very strong on care of the soul. So it's a very beautiful integrated whole, and here we have, as I said, the care of the physical, the bodily needs. So the whole of one's life is about God, everything God touches in our lives. Which brings me to what I want to focus on this morning, which is, again, I want to share from my reading of Father Iain Matthews, The Impact of God. Outside of God, everything is narrow, says John of the Cross. How true these words are. When we forget, when our consciousness is asleep, when we get too wrapped up in ourselves and in others, worries and anxieties, everything gets narrowed down and becomes quite mundane or rigid, reactive, reduced to the lowest denominator. We lose perspective towards reality, towards the present moment, where grace, divine life, waits to touch us, to open our hearts wider and deeper. What dominates the experience of John of the Cross is that God is seeking us always, and so much more than our seeking. This divine initiative is so all-encompassing that, like the air we breathe, we don't even recognize and know it is happening. Father Matthew says that John's mind was, quote, dominated by awareness of an impinging God. Now he is telling us that this is God's character throughout the journey, end quote. Imagine how our lives would change with just this shift. knowing that God's character, the very being of God, which is love, is seeking us moment within moment in all the circumstances of our lives. There is a response required of us, and that response is with an attitude that we believe. Quote, believe, namely, that God does want to give us Himself, that He is giving us Himself, and that He means to pursue that gift through to its ultimate consequences. End quote. So, simple believing is an important attitude. And this Father Iain Matthews is drawing out of the writings of John of the Cross. And it is not a believing in any super extraordinary miracle. It is a miracle, but one very simple and very much connected to our humanity. That simple miracle is believing in, living into the reality of an impinging God, a God waiting to pour God's self upon us with healing, with love, with salvation. In John of the Cross's words, quote, if a person is seeking God, which we all are, if a person is seeking God, much more is her beloved seeking her. End quote. Along with believing, there is one other thing that John tells us of what we are to do. Because God is an approaching God, our main job will be not to construct, but to receive. The key word will be not so much achievement as space. Making space for God in order to receive. That's a quote from the book. I ask myself, why is this simple response so difficult? This beloved ego, and I call it beloved ego because we need our ego. That's what makes us make a commitment to this journey. This beloved ego of ours, however, likes to dominate, to control, not just others and situations in our lives, but our inner life as well, and that perhaps is even more subtle. The interior shift that is asked of us is to get out of the way. Quote, progress will be measured less by ground covered, more by the amount of room God is given. Space, emptiness are key words, or as John puts it, nada. End quote. For John of the Cross, the spiritual landscape rests on this theological reality. A God who is lavish in bestowing Himself wherever He finds space. Thus, the only asceticism that makes sense would be the kind that clears the ground to make way for the onrush. This onrush of love, which, as I said, is God's very being. nada, hands empty and ready to receive. The question that then remains goes back to what we must do. It is not about what must I achieve, but rather what stands in the way. Or better, what can open us to an inflowing God. To conclude, I suggest this meditation for the coming week. What does block God's entry? What can open us to an inflowing God? Clearly, as we allow this question to circle around our hearts, we will find that just praying the question, that is, giving ourselves in faith to the question, will make space for God and for us to receive.